Welcome to Prepper Nation. I'm John. Thank you very much for checking this video out, no matter how you're doing it. If you're brand new to the channel, welcome. I appreciate you being here. Maybe consider hitting like and subscribe. For you usual suspects, stop being so rowdy. I know y'all being rowdy. Liz Rambo, thank you very much this morning, ma'am, for the mean bean. Truly appreciate that. So I chose the thumbnail art. Specifically, Texas Rising is actually uh, a really good mini series that came on TV about the independence of Texas. But we're not talking about that. This is not a review of that mini series or anything like that. I just feel like we're heading down that same path, and I'll explain this morning. So, illegal immigration. It's weird now that I'm saying it this way. Illegal immigration is now illegal. It's officially a crime again in the state of Texas. I mean, you could argue, hey, it's always been illegal, right? But the federal government, they won't do anything about it. Governor Greg Abbott, who must be a Beaverine, I'll explain in a moment, signed FB4 into law. I will link this down below. The folks on Patreon, the Coffee Club, got it yesterday. It's like 10 or 11 pages. It's a bill again that he signed into law, state of Texas, and it will be legally challenged. I promise you. Arizona put out something similar a few years back. It was challenged in the courts, and eventually, I think it got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, "No, you can't do this. It's illegal." But as I was telling the folks yesterday during the exclusive chat, I said, maybe Governor Abbott, who again is a Beaverine, he must be because he was listening to the show last week. The stuff I was talking about, hey, if I was in charge, I would do this. He's doing it in this bill. So, sir, if you're checking it out, I appreciate it. It'll be legally challenged and everything, but what if he has employed the same tactics that the left uses? And I was telling the crowd yesterday, look, when you get right down to it, you get into gun legislation. You know how we're always talking about they're going to chip away here and chip away here, and a lot of times it doesn't actually chip anything away, but it does get tied up into the court system for a year or so. Okay, so they will pass something that's unconstitutional, and for that year or so, you can't physically go out and get the boomsticks and things that you want to get, or the attachments. Once it's defeated, at the highest level of the court system, then it becomes legal again, and hey, you can go out and do it. But for that year or so, it's kind of on freeze, would be the way to put it. What if Greg Abbott has figured out how to employ these tactics when it comes to illegal immigration? Because courts aren't quick. Takes time one way or the other. Doesn't matter here if he wins or loses. I was telling the crowd yesterday, look, this thing gets struck down in the Supreme Court. It may take a year to get there. Then you go back to the drawing board, you reword a few things, you sign something else into law. You let it freeze and everything for the next year. So the government's viewpoint and the Supreme Court's viewpoint up until now is that immigration, the entire scope of immigration, is a federal function. It's up to DC to manage. It's up to DC to uphold the laws that are already in place. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, he's arguing dereliction of duty. In other words, he acknowledges it's the federal government's job. It's the White House's job to take care of the border. But the White House is again, they're not doing their job. Not only are they not doing their job, they're going out of their way at this point to not do their job. And I would agree with that. And so he's saying the state of Texas is kind of in self-preservation mode at this point. There's nothing else to do. He's saying we have to do this because the federal government has not done its job. Therefore, we're going to take matters into our own hands. We're going to start taking care of business here. And if the federal government wants to get involved, they want to start doing their job and enforcing the laws that are already there, Texas will back away and they'll cede to the federal government. So, again, he must have been listening because we were just talking about this last week. This new bill that is now signed into law, at least temporarily in Texas, gives authorities in Texas the right to stop people who they believe could be. Maybe they're illegal, maybe they're not. You can call that profiling, and certain rights groups in the country have said, this is profiling. You can't do that to American citizens. But again, the government of Texas is saying if they're not American citizens, they have no rights. They have human rights. Okay. They have no rights of a US citizen, is their argument. So they can be stopped. They can be, authorities can request identification. And if it's determined they're here illegally, they can be arrested on the spot and they're jailed for up to 180 days. And they also get hit with a $2,000 fine. All right. So after their jail sentence is done, they're deported back out of the country. That's on the first offense. Now, here's where it gets interesting. And again, I agree wholeheartedly with this. Greg Abbott, on the second offense, he signed this into law. If you get caught coming back into the United States again after you've been deported the first time, you're now facing anywhere from 2 to 20 years in jail. And the reason that's a broad scope, right? 2 years to 20 years. 20 years. You're asking yourself, why 20 years on a second offense? If it's determined that you have felonies in other countries and you've snuck into the United States for now a second time, they're going to treat you like a felon from another country and they're going to arrest you again for up to 20 years. And at the end of that 20-year term, you are then deported again, and they'll continue the 20 year until these people finally figure it out. Um, Again, there are rights groups that are strongly objecting to this. They're saying it's not okay to profile. We shouldn't be doing this. It's very indicative, though. The country Mexico, the Mexican government, they are objecting to this because I don't think they want these people back. I really don't. I think they understand when Texas begins to deport, Mexico is going to have a huge issue. Their border at that point is going to be completely overwhelmed. I mean, it's a huge mess. Again, um, this is why Greg Abbott signed it into law. White House spokesperson Angelo Hernandez says, and I quote, "It's the federal government's jurisdiction, not individual states," which is why I chose the thumbnail art this morning that I did. Art being a very loose term. It just says Texas Rising. Okay. Are we headed back down that road where Texas fought for its independence? Because it's starting to feel that way to me. This, out of all of the issues that we have in the United States, when I look at a state like Arizona or Texas, Florida, somewhere like that, okay, there are a lot of controversial topics, and they don't necessarily agree with DC on a great many things. But when it comes to immigration, it either has to stop or states are going to begin to collapse. And so I think this is one of those deals where a state like Texas will step back at some point and they'll say, what do we need you for? I think that argument of federal rights versus states' rights is going to come back into play at some point very, very soon. Maybe with this lawsuit. Depends on how far it would go. I agree that this should be the federal government's job. I agree with the White House on this. I agree with the Supreme Court on this. Yeah, it should be DC's job, right? They collect the most tax money, but also agree with Governor Abbott here. They're not doing their job. How much longer do we let someone underperform? Any other job, these people are fired a long time ago, and somebody competent comes in. And so Texas is saying, look, we're competent. We'll get it done. And some people last week said, John, you can't afford to jail these people. It costs a lot of money. You're talking about a lot of money keeping these illegals in jail. And I get that, but you're already paying the money through social welfare programs and things. All right. If they're getting free food and free insurance and free housing and free lights and free water, they're already getting the money. Do you want them to continue to kick vets out onto the street and take that housing up? Or do you want them in a prison block somewhere until they learn their lesson? You know what I'm saying? So this is where Texas is going. Um, the Fed should be fixing it. Texas is tired of the Fed not fixing it. They're tired of dealing with this problem. And it just, to them, I think it feels like DC doesn't even care. Again, they're going out of their way not to fix this issue. But folks, hopefully we can agree this morning, doing nothing, that's no longer an option. And as many people have pointed out over here, hey man, it's already too late. There are already too many of these people within our country, which may be true. But again, if we begin to mass deport them out, I think there's still hope. That's just me. Um, if you take that hardline approach like Abbott is taking, there's some real consequences, especially if you have a criminal record and you get caught sneaking back into the United States. Now you're facing 20 years in prison. You know what I'm saying? That's a pretty big deal. And we talk about this consolidation of power a lot here, Prepper Nation. Okay. Um, whether it be the WEF, whether it be NATO, the UN is a prime example, the EU is a prime example, where we just take our rights, not us, but our lawmakers. They just take our rights and they hand them on up. You know what I'm saying? Here, the people don't need these rights anymore. Here, now you're in charge, this sort of thing. Isn't this really what's going on here in the United States of America and has been for a long time? When you get right down to it, don't the people of Texas, of the state of Texas, know more about what they need than people in DC? Don't people in Florida and yes, even California know more about what their own state needs than the federal government? We have a lot of overreach, folks. When you get, um, I think it's Vivek, he's talking about doing away with the Department of Education at a federal level. He doesn't mean, hey, nobody's going to school anymore. He wants the states in charge of the education of said states, not a one size fits all approach because it's not working, right? And this is, you can apply this to so many other things, but when you're looking at the UN again, for the UN's a prime example, okay, because the UN exists for peace and harmony in the world. So everybody can get together, everybody can be diplomatic. This was supposed to be an organization to end wars. Okay. They haven't done their job. They've done nothing but be involved in wars, it seems like, and warmonger constantly. The same with the EU and all of this stuff. So if you're not doing your job, what do we need you for? I'm looking at the UN right now, the EU. What do we need you for? Seriously, if you're not going to do your job, just go away. So individual countries can handle their business. But shouldn't the same thing apply to the United States of America? I'm asking Chad. I'm not saying I'm for or against this, okay, folks? I'm asking the chat. Should we approach the United States the same way? If you can do your job in DC, that's awesome. We have a strong federal government. Okay. But if you can't, and you're proving time and again, year after year after year after year, you have no concept of roping in spending, no concept of treating citizens and veterans with respect and putting them above illegals. And I mean, there's just so much ridiculousness going on in this country. If you've proven time and again that you can't do your job, we need to at some point have that conversation. And I think states are going to be headed into that direction shortly, beginning with Texas. Texas has got to be sitting there, if not now, very soon, thinking, what do we need DC for? What does Washington, DC do for us? I'm not in Texas, but I'm saying Texans, right? That we can't handle ourselves, or a coalition of states, right? You're talking about with California and Texas in particular, some of the two of the biggest economies in the world. Why do you need the swamp in DC? How are they benefiting you? It seems like they're just handicapping you. You know what I mean? Um, I don't know. What are we supposed to do? Suffer until the federal government fixes it out? They figure out what they're doing wrong. They finally make amends. They finally stop printing worthless money and spending money that we don't have and letting illegals pour in, and they stop the 20-year wars for no reason. Do we just suffer until they figure that out? Or do we go to our states and say, we don't need the federal government anymore, son? We just don't. I know what that leads to, and I know what that kind of rhetoric looks like. Okay. That leads to it wouldn't be peaceful. It would not be a peaceful separation. Okay. But when you take a look at our country historically, sometimes we just got to work things out. We got to work it out. We had to work it out with England. We had to work it out during the Civil War. There have been times in this country where everybody disagrees and we just got to work stuff out. And no, it's not peaceful, but maybe it's time for something like that to happen. I don't know if it's coming in 2024 or beyond, but I do think at some point it's coming, especially if Texas is just absolutely done playing games with DC. But again, let me know what you think in the comments. If you don't mind, please shoot a thumbs up on the way out the door. Y'all take care. God bless.